This is Phantom Electric Ghost, and we are live on the air with Sarah Seltzer. You're a writer, and you're out of New York City. And we're going to talk about your book, The Singer Sisters, and also about the kind of story about like how you can overcome rejection and life's up and downs and write your debut novel. So that's kind of like the focus. But we're going to tell your story. But before we get to that, we always ask every guest on the show a couple of questions before we get to the heart of your story.
All right.
What motivates you and why do you do what you do?
That's a great question. I wish I could say that it's something really noble. But the truth is, for me, I'm just not happy unless I'm doing something creative. And I think a lot of people are this way. It could be, whether it's knitting or adult coloring books or working in your garden or creating an awesome podcast or whatever it is. Most of us are creative. We're encouraged to be creative as kids. And for me, I just get really cranky if I'm not writing. Writing is, it's the easiest way for me to be creative. It's the most inspiring way. I love to read. I love to write. So, publishing is obviously a dream come true and a great goal. But for me, I have to write to, I don't write every single day, but I have to write and have some kind of project that I'm working on to be happy. It's like exercising or drinking water.
That's awesome because you're an editor at Lilith Magazine, and you did some reporting in the New York Times, and you write essays and cultural criticism. So you're like a professional writer. So you're in your space that you want to be. Yeah. Right. Yeah. And that I always talk to creative people. The whole podcast was developed to talk to people who are creative in all areas. So we end up talking to a lot of writers. And what made you want to write a novel? Because you're writing like articles, being an editor. What made you want to write a novel?
I just think that reading novels is so satisfying. I think all of us, our attention spans are a little less, I don't know how to say this, robust than they were probably before cell phones, before COVID, before everything that's happening in the world.
I'm a child in the 70s, so I understand.
Yeah. But growing up, I was just one of those bookworms. I loved reading, anything from like Nancy Drew and the Hardy Boys to the books that were on my school's shelves to my, starting to read my parents' books, get books off of their shelves. And I just, I love the sort of satisfying arc of a novel. It's like, I think to me, it's like the difference between, I love watching TV. I love TV shows, but there's something so satisfying about a 2-hour movie, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. You go on a whole journey, and it's really interesting because my kids are of this generation where they're used to like streaming shows and watching like, 5 or 6 episodes of a show in a row, which we didn't do. And they find movies kind of stressful because of all this. There's a lot like a movie or a novel, a complete like piece of art like that. There's like suspense. There's usually sadness. There's some laughter. There you kind of go through the whole realm of human emotions up and down, and puts you through your emotional paces, and actually like make my kids watch movies for that reason, because I think it's important for them to like learn how to experience all those
compared
things.
To something that goes like 12 hours or 15 hours.
Exactly.
And it's also the whole art of like I'm a songwriter, and being a child of the 70s, I grew up with vinyl and 8 tracks and actually listening to a complete thought, which means I listened to the whole record.
Yeah. Exactly.
And the books are maybe 200,000 words, right, versus 70 or 90 today. Yeah. And so the idea that going into Tolkien, reading Tolkien, and they're going back and reading Moby Dick, and actually wanting to read it, was a different mindset instead of like getting the Cliff Notes and finding some kind of AI description for your book report. You actually had to read it.
Right. It's true. And I think that's, so I always thought, because I loved reading them so much, I'd like to try writing one. So that's
So what made you want to write about a family of folk rock singers?
Yeah. It's funny that you were talking about how much you love vinyl. Some of that comes from discovering my parents' vinyl and, the connection I felt to their music. My parents were baby boomers. So like, for instance, like they had like each had a copy of Sgt. Pepper's and like the Saturday Night Fever soundtrack, like every kind of like, seminal album from their era. They each had a copy of, and my mom had like the early Beatles albums. They had Stevie Wonder songs in the Key of Life. My dad loved Aretha. So it was like everything. And just to have that treasure trove as a kid, I think, and to hear it, you know, my parents were always playing music, classical, opera, soul, everything.
So it all,
yeah. So I'm not a musician, but I think that the book is sort of in part like about the relationship between like Generation X and millennials, and that music of the 60s and 70s that has had such a huge influence on basically everyone and everything that came after it. Because my book is about the mother and father are 60s folk rock luminaries. Kind of think like maybe Carly Simon and James Taylor, or like Joan Baez and Bob Dylan, kind of in between those two. And the daughter wants to be like a rocker. But she's, you know, she knows that her mom had this talent and this influence as a 60s folk singer, that it's going to be hard for her to live up to.
From under it.
Get out from under it. And her mom has secrets, and her mom doesn't want her to go off into the music world without a backup plan. And, you know, and she doesn't really explain why. So the book is really, it's a rock and roll drama. And it's about, you know, fame and fortune and falling out of fame and the relationship with the audience. But it's also about a mom and daughter kind of coming to understand each other
revealing
better.
You know, like a parent sometimes not fully revealing their life to their kid, but then kind of telling them just be on a certain path without giving them the reason.
Exactly, which
because
we all can relate to.
It's like, okay, just do it because I told you. It's like, well, I kind of want to know why.
Exactly.
But that's an interesting dynamic, because you know, as a musician, like, the Beatles are still kind of like the benchmark in terms of songwriting, and like the characters, like, you know, that you were inspired to have the Beatle records and vinyl.
Absolutely. Yeah. And the relationship between us and our parents' music. And I think, you know, it's going to be different, like going forward. You know, pop music is part of all of our lives, and our kids listen to our music and they have their music, and there's this conversation. But I think for the baby boomers, like that was the first time that pop music was such a huge part of identity and culture. You know, all these documentaries came out. Exactly. Like about the music festival that was here in Harlem at Marcus Garvey Park, Summer of Soul. There was the documentary about the Velvet Underground, who were down in New York City in the 60s. Every kind of music that we listen to today kind of originated in that decade. So it was always really interesting to me. So I think that, you know, subconsciously I gravitated towards it when it was time to write my first book.
Well, there's a lot of, you know, being a child of the 70s, I'm a real purveyor of, like, you know, the Velvet Underground is like iconic for me. You know, Dylan is iconic for me. Totally. You know, like they're listening to the Basement tapes, like all 10 hours of it. And the big thing is a big thing for a lot of like purist kind of musicians who like believe in the singer-songwriter. And you know, the idea that you can actually tell a story with music. And that's why I think there's a synergy between like you get a guy like a Bob Dylan or Neil Young or Joni Mitchell.
Exactly.
Like, that you get drawn into that album like you're reading a novel. That's the way I feel when I get a really good record. And so then if you have the synergy of telling a story of a family or like folk rock singers, that's kind of woven into it, that like you've got that interconnectedness of the art and the music all in real time.
Yeah, exactly. I think for me, like I would say that, you know, in some ways like Joni Mitchell and Bob Dylan, they're like literary influences on me. I don't, you know, write like them, but the fact that they could tell these stories that captivated me so much really, really made a huge impression on me when I was, you know, younger. And just as much as the novels I was reading, those lyrics are really important. And the book is full of lyrics. I mean, they are not as good as Bob Dylan or Joni Mitchell lyrics by any means, but it was really fun to write them and to have them be, they're a key part of the story. So, you know, the characters write things in their songs that maybe they don't feel comfortable saying out loud to each other.
Yeah, that's the thing, is the artists sometimes will speak through their music
Exactly.
to their partner, to the world,
Yeah.
something that they can't say directly. And then it comes through the art, and you were like, wow, it's like that's so powerful. Like, but then you find out like they really can't tell somebody in person that, but through the song they can. So that dynamic is interesting that you're talking about
Yeah.
because I think the secret sauce of any creative person is the fact that they have that vulnerability and it comes through the art. But then the consequences, like maybe in your story, you talk about the dichotomy of like maybe you can say it in the song, but you actually don't live that way.
Right. That's right. Exactly.
So that becomes a struggle. Does that become part of the whole
Yeah,
fabric?
it is part of it, that you can write these really pure things in your music that maybe you can't live up to, for sure. And your pain in life, right? When you turn your pain into art, it can become really beautiful. But in your daily life, if you're experiencing pain or heartbreak, it's just hard. It's not,
Hard.
you could make some sort of beautiful art about it, but then when you're dealing with like your kids, as my character is, maybe you're just yelling at them. So that tension that they feel between their mother, who was able to create such beautiful art and is also just a flawed human being.
Yeah.
To them, she's just their mom. To the rest of the world, she's this iconic songwriter, is a really interesting thing that I explore as well.
Yeah, because you're living up to you live up to the icon status?
Exactly.
And especially with your family, probably you don't.
Right.
Because they know the truth of like, hey, my parents are just like any other parent, or maybe they're like lacking.
Yeah.
What my friends' parents are there, but they're on the road.
Yeah.
Or they're in the studio, or they're on tour. Like they're so involved in their head that they're not present.
Right.
And so then it's like all this beauty is like, well, I didn't feel that beauty. The world felt the beauty, but I didn't feel it.
Yeah.
So there's like a resentment with the kids, like about that.
Yeah, there's some of that. There's resentment. There's resentment that I think that, honestly, my character Emma resents her mom's talent, and that her mom chose to step away from music. And she just doesn't understand how somebody so talented would make a different choice. So that's really baffling to her. She is a lacking mom in some ways. She's good in other ways. Like, as you would kind of imagine, she's like a cool mom. But she also is distracted and has her own kind of secret world that her kids aren't part of, and they feel shut out. Particularly her daughter feels shut out from it, and she can't quite understand why. And part of her growing up throughout the novel is kind of coming to understand like what her mom has been through as a woman in music in the 60s, and maybe why her mom acts the way she does, even if it's still flawed, that she has her reasons. So
yeah, because maybe she had a toxic experience and got kind of burned out, or
right.
It's like, this is not for me anymore. Because sometimes you hit that wall and it's like you're not enamored by it anymore.
Yeah, and everyone in the family is like a different kind of artist, like, which I think would be really interesting to you because you talk to different kinds of artists on your show. Some of them are more performers and really like being in front of a crowd. Some of them are more like behind the scenes people who like to write and create, maybe like in their rooms. And so there's some tension within the family because it's a whole family of artists. They're all creative and they all like to express themselves, but they do it in different ways. And that actually causes tension between them.
Yeah. Because there might be like people who think there's like one way.
Yeah.
But there's not one way, but there's might be this expectation like, oh, well, you're supposed to be on tour, or you're supposed to do this, you're supposed to do that. And if you have a different point of view, it's kind of like, Jim Morrison in The Doors.
Right.
At the end of The Doors, Jim was kind of like checking out. Like, I don't want to be the pop star. I want to be a writer. I want to be a poet.
Yep. Right? Exactly.
And so then people are like, well, you've got this great thing with The Doors. It's like, well, I'm not there because I want to be the poet.
Right.
That's what, from the beginning, he was the poet.
Right.
And he just happened to fall into it and it worked. Yeah. But then that's not where his heart was,
Right. That's exactly like my character, actually. And then there's also the Beatles deciding that they didn't want to tour. So they could just be in the studio and experiment. Yeah, right. I mean, there's tons of examples of artists coming to these crossroads. I think, as even after I wrote the book, I keep reading, because I continue to love to read about pop culture. I continue to read about rock stars and learn things that like sound very similar to what I wrote about. Like Patti Smith took 18 years off for making music to raise her kids. Like, you know, there's just like these interesting stories
Of people
where people come in and out. Exactly.
Yeah, and as people feel like I read about Pete Townsend, like in the Who, and they were kind of like the first punks.
Yeah.
You know, and it's kind of but then at the same time they were punk, they did these progressive rock operas. So you're like, what's the dichotomy with that? Here's this band that's very punk, very much like a pre-Clash band, a pre-Sex Pistols. They're really outrageous. The early version of the Who is like, and even when you saw them, like they had this punk aesthetic, but then they had this progressive bent that seemed to be totally diametrically opposed to what they were doing with Tommy.
Right.
So what is that?
Yeah.
It's like
we contain multitudes. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And that's always the interesting thing, the inner conflict with these stories in music and pop culture.
Yeah, right. Just being, and with like Dylan sort of changing his deal every decade or so, like
reinventing himself.
Reinventing themselves, and like the Stones making a disco album. I mean, I think you're a singer-songwriter, but a lot of great artists are pushing themselves, or they get burned out and they want to try something different. And so, some of the book is also just about the family making peace with each other, but also about each sort of artist within the family trying to figure out like where they belong as an artist,
where their own path is, like how do they self-actualize, and be happy,
right?
Because like your management might want you to be happy by putting you on tour,
right?
So much that you're not even living.
Yeah.
You're kind of just out there. And then like you might have these ideas like Bowie like to reinvent himself.
Right.
And he was able to get away with it because he had the force of will. That's like, I'm not being moved by whatever they want me to do. I'm going to do what I want to do.
Yeah.
And that's a hard place to be.
Yeah. You have to be really strong.
Don't actually are able to carry that out.
No, you have to be quite strong, I think, to be able to really see your vision through that way. It's fascinating.
So when you're writing the lyrics, like as a writer, it's like, I got to imagine being a folk, like you're building your character like a fantasy novel.
Yeah.
They go create their characters, you get the whole, these big fantasy worlds that people build up.
Right.
But now you have to build this world and have authentic voice as a folk rock singer. So like, I guess you're pulling from what you love because you love that genre anyway.
Yeah.
So then you, as a writer, it's like, well, I know how I can weave this, because as a musician, like I don't copy Lead Belly.
Right.
Note for note. But if I get in that mode, I'm going to be in that zone.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
So it's not like plagiarism, but I can kind of feel what Lead Belly was doing.
Exactly.
And go that way.
Yeah, exactly. So for each song, each set of lyrics that I wrote in the novel, and there are quite a few, I kind of had a mood and a couple of singers in mind, maybe a couple of songs. So it was like, oh, this is going to be like, this song is going to be like a road trip song, and I have like a Joni Mitchell song maybe, and a Bob Dylan song in mind as I'm writing it, but it's its own thing. So that was kind of how I approached it. And for me, the lyrics were fun because like lyrics, at least, pop lyrics don't have to be brilliant. They just have to sound catchy. So it was a different muscle to work than say like trying to write a really good poem. You can rhyme like I and by and and my.
Because it has to work as a harmony, as a song, as a melody.
Exactly. But I think also like really trying to, at least in some of the lyrics, like hit some emotional beats, so that my readers would try to experience what the characters were experiencing as they were writing and listening to the songs.
Yeah, that's the interesting thing. Like the way you see Dylan go into like Tangled Up in Blue, or like songs like Idiot Wind.
Yeah, which I've been listening to a lot.
That's on the tracks.
Yeah.
It's like, even though it's about his marriage, if you listen to those songs, he creates characters within the song that are like
a man named Greg,
separate from him.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But it's supposed to be about his divorce.
Right.
He's still making these characters.
Yeah. And it's like the emotions are coming from him, but the stories, he's like a magpie. He's grabbing little stories from everywhere all around him, which is cool.
Yeah, so that's just
Yeah.
a cool way of like
So cool.
approaching.
Yeah.
And then you get the other end, like if you deal with like a Joni Mitchell or Neil Young, and they
Yeah.
get to these really like like vulnerable lyrics.
Yeah, exactly.
They
Yeah.
they pull like, you know, when you get Neil, is like a lot of times I love his stuff where he's like he's got that kind of shaky pitch. They even called him
Mhm.
shaky sometimes because
Mhm.
he had this thing where he would like have this pitches like wavering.
Yeah.
And he would do it like that on Tonight's the Night. And he's talking
Yeah.
about the death of one of his roadies.
Yeah.
And it's just so poignant. And he's not trying to be perfect. He's like, I'm not. He actually said I was going into the ditch. He had this thing called the Ditch Trilogy.
Yeah.
He had done like all these perfect pitch type records, and he said, "Well, I'm not going to go that way. I'm going to go for the vulnerability of my voice
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
tell the story in that way." So it's like very present. So in terms of like their approach to your characters, how do they like approach their voices? Are you able to kind of describe that with your
A little bit, yeah. So, you know, the two sisters, I kind of had fun with the two sisters in the band together, the singer sisters. So the folk band in the 60s is my main character, one of my two main characters, Judy, and she's also with her sister Sylvia, who's a character in the novel too. And Sylvia has like the pure voice. Sylvia is like the one who sort of sounds like, everyone says she sounds like Joan Baez or you know, Judy Collins or one of these, you know, and like Judy is the really talented songwriter, but she has the rougher voice. And so at the beginning of the novel, when they're teenagers, everyone thinks of Sylvia as the talent because she's more beautiful, she's taller, she's, you know, more confident, and she has the more beautiful, like classically beautiful voice. But Judy is like the secret weapon. And by the end, you know, everyone recognizes that she's a really good songwriter, and that her voice, even though her voice is rougher and she's singing harmony, she actually has something to offer too with her voice. So that there's a little bit of that. And then, you know, Emma, the daughter, is more of like a you know, riot girl screaming, you know, rougher voice. Yeah.
Or
yeah,
girly sound type of thing. Like
like
Liz Phair type of.
Exactly. Liz Phair is exactly one of my, you know, inspirations for her. So they, you know, I did try to kind of make each of them like a little bit of a composite of like different, I mean, they're their own characters, and then they're also like, you know, maybe 5 or 6 for each character, real singers who they're supposed to kind of be like or similar to. And so that was also really fun because, you know, like for Emma, the rocker, like there's Liz Phair, like she has qualities of someone like an Alanis, who was like really, really famous and a huge pop star, but also someone like, you know, Ani DeFranco, who was always like an indie author, super indie, and, you know, going around just with her guitar. So I kind of was like able to bring in some things from both of them, which I thought, you know, which was
like a Juliana cool. Hatfield kind of Blake.
Yeah, baby. Exactly. Yeah. So there's, it's fun. Yeah. So it's fun. And I think, you know, what was really fun about the book, and what's been fun about, you know, it's been out for about 6 months now, is that some readers who, like you, clearly are, you know, super, super up on their pop culture, like get all the references, and they're like, oh, like Emma is like these musicians. And, you know, and some people maybe only understand the music from the 60s or only understand from the 90s, but they just, you know, are enjoying the vibe. And some people are just in it for the family drama and they don't care about the music at all.
Yeah. Because if you're a good writer, you can pull somebody into something just because of the narrative and the dialogue. And if people get hooked, it's like, you know, they get hooked on that song, they get pulled into the song, you get hooked by the intrigue, right? The drama,
exactly,
right?
Exactly.
Like if you then people like, oh, I like this kind of, maybe not that it's a soap opera, but they like the idea you get pulled into the kind of, you know, story between the people, like just a dialogue that between, you know, different souls and how they respond to life. You know, people can see things that like, oh, that mirrors things I have experienced, you know. And people, every time somebody hears a song, the fan kind of owns it, right? They get the vision. The songwriter wrote this, but the fans got that. Do you address that kind of thing?
Yes, definitely. I think so much for Judy in particular, who's the 60s iconic songwriter. You know, she's writing these songs that are really from her own experience. They're kind of diaristic. They are Joni Mitchell-like in that way, but people are interpreting them. You know, she has these fans coming up to her and being like, you wrote about me, like you wrote about my life. And she's always just like, I was just trying to write a nice song. So that's definitely a conflict that she experiences, that, you know, people kind of see her as a prophet, and that is what, you know, Dylan has so obviously struggled with his whole career.
He
the expectations that people have of him and of his lyrics, and so I wanted that to be
it's hard. It becomes a big weight on your shoulders.
It is a big weight,
and then
that's
sometimes like people get disappointed.
Yeah, exactly.
Like people get disappointed in Dylan when he doesn't represent like the ideology the way they think he should.
Exactly.
Especially with his, like, people asking about his protest music.
Right.
And then he kind of, like, Scorsese interviewed him, and he's like kind of walking away from it. Saying, well, you know, that was just a song.
Yeah.
That I wrote. It's like, I wasn't part of the movement. I'm a writer.
Yeah.
Right? And so I just interpret, and that's not exactly where I am. It's like, okay, people weren't buying it because they
because
were
he was so good at it. Yeah.
They're like, well, you must believe in that because you wrote it.
And I think he did, you know, I think he really did, because the songs are so authentic. But I also think that he was just, he was also kind of a documentarian who was writing about everything he saw. So he was able to, he has that quality of being able to kind of inhabit different
spaces.
And, you know, it's true. Like the protest songs he wrote in those 2 or 3 years were extraordinary. And my characters actually talk about it in the book. Like in the opening scene, they're talking about Blowing in the Wind, and talking about, you know, how, like, what an amazing song it is, and how hard it is to write their own songs after something like that.
So like that comes along. How do you match that? But it's like, the thing is, like, you got to find something that's like inside of you.
Exactly.
Where I think the comparison trap is where you get stuck. Like if you're trying to write that, or Dylan wrote it.
Yeah.
You need to find something like that's inside of you.
Exactly.
Right? Something you've experienced that's uniquely something, but then you can put a shine on it, and then it becomes that's your voice. And then you can take it and put it out there. And that's how you get these indie, you know, people like the Liz Phair and the Juliana Hatfields, you know, they're able to get out there as a singer-songwriter and have their voice. And they're not Joni Mitchell.
Right. They're so authentically themselves.
They're themselves, you know, they're like who they are. But they're like, they might have been inspired by Joni to get on stage and do it. But they're not her.
Yeah. Yeah. It's all true.
That's cool. But the whole dynamic of your book is super interesting to me, because, you know, growing up in that era where the song is so important. And the writer, you know, that like the guys on Tin Pan Alley are writing it like you wrote it. Like the difference is like the idea, like you had this whole machine of like songwriters that would give like Sinatra and give, you know, give it to you know, to you know, all these great singers.
Right.
But like nobody thought that maybe they should write it. It's like, no, that somebody else should write it. The idea that you could have the permission to write it, is that kind of coming from the fact that their family was famous, or that they felt like, you know, that gave them permission structure to be a writer?
I think that's what the you know, that's why I decided to put it in the folk genre, because I like lots of different kinds of music. But I think what was so interesting about the folk revival, and it's kind of addressed in the new Dylan movie, like this Greenwich Village folk revival of the early 60s, was like, that was what made it so revolutionary, was that like you could have a guitar and write your own songs, or, you know, thanks to Dylan, write your own songs, and just like, you didn't have to be a musical prodigy, you didn't have to be super well trained. All you needed was a guitar, and you could borrow someone's guitar, and then suddenly you could do it yourself. And that was the big change from like the Tin Pan Alley era. That, you know, so like it's a very appealing, the idea that you could just kind of pack your guitar up and go and start playing at these hootenannies and these clubs. And, you know, it was a very brief period, but it was so fruitful, and it's obviously still so big in all of our imaginations.
Yeah, I mean, still in the indie world, you know, I find indie musicians all over the world that I tend to interview, not as much as I used to, but, you know, every month I get 2 or 3 independent acts. Doesn't matter where they are. And if I find them interesting, I bring them to the world. And because I've always liked that. You know, as a fan of music. I like to find the people who are doing something that's maybe not you know, hasn't hit the world yet. It's like the indie emerging artist, the person who's willing to kind of get out there and be the Velvet Underground of their generation.
Right. Totally.
You know, yeah, that's what I'm always looking for, that, because that to me is like, that's exciting to hear something that's not so on repeat. Everybody likes to just take the cloned thing,
yeah,
and you know, the thing that's kind of expected of you, instead of like trying to actually, you know, be willing to have your own voice out there.
Yeah. And when people hear an original voice, they get so excited about it. So
yeah, it's just a kind of in an era where people think you can just AI everything.
I know, and yeah, I know. I think it's so interesting that the Dylan movie is so big at this moment because of that. Because it's really making a case for like authenticity and you know, having your own voice. You know, but in its portrayal not just of Dylan, but also of like the other musicians who are in the movie,
Pete Seeger,
and Baez, and like, you know, the folkies and bluesies who comes through, and they're each so unique and so true to themselves, and it's not a big production for any of them. It's just, you know, like their voices, and so it's very appealing right now.
Just have that Americana thing. You know, the idea when Dylan got with the band, and they created this Americana vibe at Big Pink. And these songs, is like, this stuff could have been written like in the 30s, right? Yeah. You know, it's kind of folky, hillbilly, Americana. Weirdness. It wasn't just that.
Because there's poetry and lyricism.
And saying all these, but it's coming from this kind of, it's not country, but it's kind of coming from country. It's got rock in it. Robbie's throwing these licks in there, and you're like, what's going on?
Yeah.
And you know, it's just, to me, is like, that has always been the process of those basement tapes. Like of the process that a songwriter goes through to do their work. And the idea that you know, like Dylan on his typewriter, he's kind of famous for just going on his typewriter, just kind of stream of consciousness, getting it out, and just coming. He's like channeling something from the muse, and he's able to just put all this material out. And you're like, what? How did he able to? Did you go into like, how do your characters create their work? I mean, did it come from like angst or hard work, or like, how do they develop their songs?
I think it's different for all of them. I think that, you know, for Judy, the one who's sort of the most talented songwriter of the group, she, you know, is really naturally gifted in the way that like Joni Mitchell or Dylan is, and she's also just really, really smart, and she also has like huge in the world of parenting, we'd say she has very big feelings, and she feels really restricted by society, so she has a lot of anger and sadness about kind of, you know, how everyone expects her to conform and be a certain way. So a lot of her songwriting, her kind of most famous songs, come from that. And then everyone else around her is writing songs differently. Her husband is more of like a poppy, like melody guy. And for him, I think it's more hard work. And he's like, just more of like a natural showbiz guy. You know, she's more of a poet, and he's like a performer. And then her daughter, you know, is more imitative. I think she hasn't, maybe like, she's still in the process of finding her voice, but she does. Her kind of most famous song in the book comes from like a letter. She turns a letter that a stalker fan of her mom's leaves. She turns that into a big song. The way that was sort of borrowed from Sarah McLachlan had this big song in the 90s that was, I think, like a stalker, like she turned a stalker's letter.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
So, and this is a little different because it wasn't like menacing, but it was, but yeah, because she doesn't have material yet, because she's kind of more spoiled. Like her parents were successful musicians, and she, you know, goes to an art school, and she kind of is free to do whatever she wants. So like her mom was rebelling, was such a was so angry because in the 60s, it was, you know, really, really still very strict for young women. And there's a lot of shame and stuff. And for Emma, like her parents let her do whatever. She's roaming around New York City with her friends. She has piercings. She has tattoos, you know, it's harder for her to find her voice. Yeah. She's more of a free spirit. So I think that is another tension that sort of animates the book, is that her mother has a much harder life, but that also like leads to more productive songwriting. And so, Emma
because
is
if
kind of a
you
rebel
don't go
without a
through the
cause.
struggle, that's
Yeah.
always the rub.
Which isn't
Like,
how it is for everyone. I mean, like Taylor Swift, I think, can write,
can
like
write.
is a pretty privileged person, and she, can turn her everyday breakups and like friendship dramas into these incredible songs. So,
well, I
she
think
has
it's that writer's ability to process.
Exactly.
You could be in a really good place financially and still be
Yeah.
able to kind of process.
And heartbreak is universal,
which is waves coming through you. Like you still more money, more problems. So you can still find the pain in it, right?
Yeah.
Like Neil Young, he always found. And he was like, and he would kind of talk about it, like, I'm making all this money, but there's people around me dying, right?
Yeah.
So I'm gonna look at not just myself, I'm gonna look at everything else and find, it's just how you weave the story. I think that's the talent of a creative. Is like you can take the everyday thing you see. You could go to a cafe and see something, and then put that into a song. You can walk down the street and see something. You look up and see. You're just able to look at things, and then also find something in yourself, like a feeling, and then weave that together with the external, and then suddenly it's magical. Like, and some people maybe can't process. Like, wow, how can you do that? But like that's what the creative soul
It's not that different from writing fiction, or other kinds of creativity where I think you're always mixing like your internal state and your emotions with things that you observe or feel externally. So, in the same way, like this book, I'm not a musician. I've never been famous, but some of the questions about making art versus being a parent versus, like what are your duties to your creativity versus to the people you love, that, that's coming from me. And the close, my family and I are super close. We don't have the kind of rivalries that the family does, but just the like family dynamic, the close family, the constant back and forth, that comes from my family too. So I think most of it is coming from pop culture, but you have to have something of yourself.
You weave in like
your own, that
your
makes it feel authentic.
Because you're able to take those pieces that you're willing to share. The vulnerability of opening up. And then weaving it, and then like Dylan, he put layers. He would create
layers and layers,
and then like all kinds of synonyms and all these things is like allegory, and it's like, but it's really under the covers. It's him. you dive down, but he's still able to take the layers, and you kind of uncover like, well, how much of this is like where you get down to the real raw emotion.
I know. And when you hear like a really personal Dylan song, it's always so it's so much shocking, because so many of his songs are so layered, and then occasionally he'll hit you with with a song that's just like very, very straightforward and emotional, and you're like, wow, he can do that too. Like it's just he can do it all.
It's just cool when you can have that emotional connection to your audience and not be scared of it, because I think that's the thing, is the fear and safety as a human. And when you get to be an artist, you tend to be a little tread into places that can be a little unsafe in terms of like maybe you could feel because you're revealing a lot, and if somebody hates it, then you take it as a hit, as a personal attack, because like that is me that you're attacking. But then you have a little bit of a suit of armor when you're, say, well, it doesn't matter, but down deep, it might matter if somebody kills your song and you were putting your heart into it. You might say it doesn't matter, but it does.
For sure. Yeah.
Like the critical reviews, like did you go through anything with like the critics, like slamming any of your artists or having like issues, like, and then they're kind of like, well, how do they handle it?
There's a whole scene where there's like a sexist Village Voice critic who really goes off after Judy, and she pretends that she doesn't care, but like then I have her like his voice is in her head for like the next few chapters, because she she says she doesn't care, but she can't get it. So it's definitely a part of the book, that whole process. And it's funny because then I'm going through the process, or I've been through the process of seeing people review my book. And I've I'm pretty tough, thick skin because I've written for the internet for, over a decade. And so
yeah, you have to be on
and tweeters and, but it's still different when it's your creative work. And, it's so far it's been fine, but I can relate to my characters now more.
Yeah.
Having gone through that.
Have you thought of this being turned into a screenplay or a teleplay? Do you think anybody, because it seems like it could fit that in that world?
Yeah.
From what we've been talking about.
People are, people keep bringing that up. I mean, I have a film agent, and we'll just have to see, what happens with the book. I do think it would be a great miniseries.
Yeah, I definitely see it in the way I could see it being out there in the world and in the streaming world as like a drama, like a teledrama.
Yeah, exactly.
Or it could actually be a separate film as an independent film. You know, if you had an indie film director take it and turn it into a short form, into a 2-hour, 3-hour movie.
Yeah.
It seems like you could go either way.
Yeah.
It just depends. I know that we mentioned that people like to be, just sitting and watching like 10 hours of a single series all at once, like binge watching.
Mm-hmm.
So given that, is like you get the whole thing in a weekend.
Yeah.
Exactly. And then maybe you got 10 hours to do it versus 2 hours.
Mm-hmm.
So then you can go into things at a really great level of detail.
Yeah.
That you probably can't in 2 hours. Like a film director has to make choices, but sometimes those choices is what makes the movie.
Yeah. You can have fun with a miniseries. I think for any novel, you can have fun with like the minor characters and the subplots, and developing those more.
Stretch it out.
Cool. That'd be fun.
Dive into it.
Yeah.
That sounds really cool. I mean, the opportunities in the world as a creator, like once you put something out there, they can spawn all these other things. You can do audiobook, you can do the teleplay, screenplay, movie, you can do a theater play for it. There's like it just opens up like a lot of possibilities.
Yeah.
Are you working on like a second book?
And by the way, there is a great audiobook for this. They hired 3 wonderful actresses to do it. So so that was really cool also, because hearing it in other people's voices. Yes, I'm working on another book. I very at the very beginning stages. This book took 7 years, the Singer Sisters, between starting to draft it and it getting published. So I'm not rushing myself for book number 2. I have, a day job and little kids. But I'm trying, because of what we were saying at the very beginning before my internet cut out, that I just have to, I have to be working on something, and it just, I feel better.
Yeah, the drive as an artist, like you do it because you love it, and then it's like the law of attraction, or you kind of throw things out in the world, and you get your tribe comes to it, right? Because that's what. Yeah, I've always been a big believer as a songwriter. Is like sometimes I'll just throw something into SoundCloud.
Yeah, and see what happens.
Just to see what happens, and then sometimes you get to work with somebody. Somebody finds some, so you would have never, if you just kept it to yourself, then you would lose the opportunity to actually somebody from Norway likes it, and then you start working with them.
Right.
And you end up having a relationship with somebody you would have never had because you were too scared to put it out in the world.
Right. You're right.
The opportunity to get it out there allows you to connect.
Yeah, connecting is, and that's, I think, it's something that I cover in the book, and then something that I've thought about just as a creative person, and the last 6 months touring the book, and realizing that so much of creativity isn't just about finding like a big audience and fame. It's about those connections, like people. It's an opportunity for connection, for human connection, and every single person who reads the book and has a meaningful experience, or that comes to one of my readings and talks to me about, their grandpa was a singer, and they relate to it for that reason. It's an incredible thing. And it
gets people talking. It gets people vibing, and then tells people like why they love music, or maybe they want to pick up the guitar again.
Exactly.
Or maybe they want to go talk to somebody, or maybe they want to be a writer because they saw what you did and they say, hey, I could have that voice too.
Yeah.
So it gives people the permission structure to believe and to participate, in life.
Yeah.
Because then you put it out there and people find the synergy, they find the things that they resonate with them. You know, you hit that kind of Pete Townsend talking about this universal note, right? This key that like
Yeah.
who's next that everybody was gonna pick
Yeah.
up on and get to. And I find it's like in art that happens. You know, that idea he had that's out there.
It is totally, it really is. It is.
So that's cool. That's so we've got your link.
Yeah.
It's kind of like long with the number, but that will be fully clickable. It's the Singer Sisters link. You can see at the end, the Singer Sisters, but that will be fully.
You can also just Google the Singer Sisters.
So that will bring you right to that. To your publisher.
Exactly. Yeah, it is my publisher's site for the book, and the book looks like this. It has a lady guitar in front.
Oh, that's awesome.
Cool. Yeah, I love it. It looks like an old concert poster.
Yeah, it does have that vibe.
Yeah,
like a 70s vibe.
Yeah, totally, totally. Yep. So it's fun, and it's it's a good cover, for merch.
Oh, merch is good. Yeah. It's like you never know. Like you go to a book site, and sometimes you want to have a poster, and a T-shirt, and the buttons. Like that's how we in the music industry we can make more money from our shirts,
exactly,
than we do from our than for the album.
This is true.
But that's how it works. Yeah. But it's just cool to talk to you today. I'm sorry for that interruption we had.
I'm sorry too.
But at least we were able to finish the interview. I think that's really important, and people got to hear about like your voice through this book. And I think this book is, being a fan of music, I'm excited to tell my friends about it. I have a lot of friends, in my age group that are always kind of lamenting that this isn't the age of the singer-songwriter, right?
Well, this is the book for you.
It's like I've been telling my best friend tonight. He's an attorney, but he's always looking for something cool to read, and he's like, "Yeah, I'm going to get him to check you out." So yeah,
great. Thank you so much. Yeah, it was really fun talking to you, and we had such a great point of connection with all our shared love of 70s singer-songwriters. So it was a delight.
Well, thank you, and have a great night.
Okay, take care.